So remember the positive bodhicitta motivation that you already generated earlier today and hopefully renewed several times during the day. So bring that back up into your mind and make that the reason, the motivation for being here now and joining in this class. So let's do another meditation related to the notion of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self or I, which all the Buddhist schools unanimously reject and say that that kind of self doesn't exist at all. And yet we have deep within our mind innately the conception of such a self, the tendency to believe in such a self. And so that's something we need to investigate and check to see if it's true or not. And so start by just trying to get a glimpse of that sense of self. It's the way it manifests, the way it appears, is like a feeling of an I that is in charge, a sort of controller or boss over our aggregates, our body and mind, something that owns them and controls them, tells them what to do. And just try to bring to mind an experience where that sense of I was more clear, more vivid. One possible situation where this sense of I might come up strongly is if we are asked to do something we don't want to do, and there may be a feeling inside, I don't want to do that. What are you telling me to do? So kind of a sense of rebelliousness, rejection. So that sense of I might be this self-sufficient, substantially existent I. So let's consider one of the terms used to refer to this type of I, substantially existent. So the meaning of that is something that can appear under its own power without depending on other things appearing. So it's kind of able to appear all by itself. And this is opposite to another term, which is imputedly existent. Something that is imputedly existent cannot appear under its own power, but it can only appear in dependence on other things appearing. So that sounds kind of abstract, but a good example of this is forest. To be able to see a forest or to think of a forest, we have to see or think of trees. A bunch of trees growing together in the same place. Now, a tree isn't a forest, and even a bunch of trees isn't a forest. Forest is just imputed onto a bunch of trees growing together in the same place. So to be able to see a forest or to think about a forest, we have to see or think about things that are not forest. So that's the meaning of imputedly existent. And substantially existent is the opposite. It means the thing can appear on its own without other things having to appear. So an example of something substantially existent, although this only applies to the non-Prasangika schools, so put them aside for the moment. But anyway, for the other non-Prasangika schools, an example of something substantially existent would be a tree. Because a tree can appear under its own power without the need for other things to appear. So to see a tree or to think about a tree, we just have to have a tree there. So in a similar way, if there was a substantially existent I, which is how it appears to be due to this innate ignorance, there seems to be a substantially existent I. And if there really was such a thing as a substantially existent I, then it should be able to appear on its own, under its own power, without the need for other things to appear, things that are not it. So just contemplate this in relation to the sense of an I that seems to be there and seems to be in charge of the aggregates, the owner, the controller of the body and the mind. So it does seem to be something that exists on its own, kind of separate from the body and mind in a more powerful, superior position. And if the I really did exist that way, if there really was a substantially existent I, we should be able to see it on its own, appearing under its own power, without depending on any of the aggregates appearing. So just contemplate that and see if you can find something inside of you that is this substantially existent I, able to appear on its own without the need for other things like the aggregates, the body, the mind, appearing. If this is hard to do, one thing you could try is just check. When you think I, when you have the thought I am this, I am that, I am here, I am doing such and such. So what appears to your mind? And if what appears to your mind when you think I is your body or some part of your body, like your face, or your mind, or some part of your mind, like your thoughts, and understand that those are not I. Those are part of your aggregates, body and mind, that are the basis of imputation of the I, and they're not I. So if there was a substantially existent I, again, it should be able to appear independent of the body, independent of the mind, on its own, through its own power. So what is that I? So this type of I is still a coarse one compared to the more subtle one of inherently existing I. But that is very subtle and very hard to get to. And so it's good to start with this more coarse one and just explore that one. And that will make it easier eventually to be able to explore, investigate the more subtle level of I, the inherently existing one. So to start with, a couple weeks ago, we going through the Cittamatra school, we talked about how the Cittamatra school accepts that there are 8 kinds of consciousness. In addition to the usual 6 types of consciousness, they add on one that's called the alaya vijnana. That's the Sanskrit term. It's translated as mind basis of all, or foundation consciousness, or storehouse consciousness. So there's different ways of translating it. And then there's another one called an afflicted mind, which its function is to look at the mind basis of all, the alaya vijnana, and think that's the self, that's the substantially existent self. So those 2 extra minds are added onto the usual 6. And I had said that the Cittamatra school is the only school that accepts those two extra types of mind. You remember that? But then in our discussion, a few people mentioned some Kargyu teachers talking about the Alaya Vishnana. And I had come across that myself. So I was curious. So I did a little bit of research. And I found on Alex Berzin's website called Study Buddhism that this particular view that Cittamatra is the only school that talks about the 8 consciousnesses. This is the Gelugpa view. This is according to Lama Tsongkhapa and the Gelugpas. Whereas the other Tibetan schools, non-Gelug schools, they talk about it as well. And they even say that it's not only Cittamatra that accepts these 8 types of consciousness, but all the Madhyamika schools do. So I wrote to Alex, and we had a little bit of communication. He sent me some links, various articles on his website, you know, how the Kargyus talk about it, how the Nyingmas talk about it, how the and I found it all a little bit overwhelming, difficult to understand. But then finally he sent me an email that kind of summarized the points. So that's what I put up here on the slide. So we'll just go through these points. So first point is, according to many non-Gelug authors, so that means like Kargyu, Nyingma, Sakya, and so on, Madhyamaka also accepts 8 consciousnesses. The usual 6 plus Alaya Vijnana and afflicted mind. Okay, so they say not only Cittamatra, but also Madhyamaka talks about these 8 consciousnesses. But the next point is, many of these authors say that these two appear truly existent, but they are empty of true existence. And so that's different from the Cittamatra, because not only does Cittamatra talk about these extra 2 consciousnesses, but they say they are truly existing. All minds, all impermanent phenomena are truly existing, whereas according to these non-Gelug schools, Madhyamaka, they talk about these 2 extra consciousnesses, but they don't say they're truly existing. They say they're empty of true existence. So that's consistent with the Madhyamaka view. Everything is empty of true existence. So that would be one difference. And then he said, some non-Gelug authors assert Alaya Vijnana, that's the foundation consciousness, as equivalent to the abiding Buddha nature. Yeah, I couldn't find a precise reference for that, but the abiding Buddha nature is probably the natural abiding Buddha nature, what we call the emptiness of a sentient being's mind, the emptiness of a sentient being's mind. So some authors say the Alaya Vijnana is the abiding Buddha nature. And others explain various types of alaya in the context of Mahamudra and Dzogchen teachings. So in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, the term alaya and Alaya Vijnana come up, but the way they would explain it would be different. And I did find one on his website. There was actually a teaching that the Dalai Lama was giving on the 6 perfections. And at some point he spoke about this Sakya view that explains clear light in terms of the causal continuum that is the Alaya foundation for all. So they're relating it to clear light. It all seemed quite complicated from my mind, my limited understanding. But anyway, anyone who's interested in that, wants to explore these other views about the Alaya, You're welcome to look on his website, Study Buddhism, and you just type in Alaya Vijnana and all these things will come up. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. It sort of answers something, a question that I had in my mind, like why would Chogyam Trungpa talk about Alaya Vijnana? And somebody else mentioned Trungpa Rinpoche. So even though they are in the, it's Tibetan Buddhism, and most Tibetan schools regard Madhyamaka as the highest school. And what I have always learned was Madhyamaka says no such thing as Alaya Vijnana. So, but that's only the Gelugpa view. So I've learned something new here. Yes. Huh? Khadro Rinpoche, but he's Khargi as well. No?
Khadro.
Which Khadro?
Khadro
Rinpoche. She's Khargi Nyingma. Yeah. But yeah, as for the Gelug school, then Alex said that all the Gelug authors, because this is, I guess, Lama Tsongkhapa, his evaluation, say that Alaya Vijnana and the afflicted mind do not exist at all, either conventionally or ultimately. And so according to the Gelug schools, all the Madhyamaka schools only assert 6 types of consciousness. My thought is, the Indian texts, like both the sutras, the Buddha's words, and then the texts written by the Indian masters, the Nalanda masters, and so on, they're very terse and, just use a few words and don't necessarily explain things in great detail. And so later, people like the Tibetans reading these texts and trying to understand what they are saying, came up with different interpretations. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's why we have all these different views, different interpretations of things. Anyway, now we're ready to move on to the Madhyamaka school. So I think we can feel happy and rejoice that we've made it this far. We've finished 3 of the 4 schools. I hope it hasn't been too painful, too difficult. Now we're ready to dive into Madhyamaka. And this is, according to our teachers, the most important school. And it's also quite difficult. And it has a few different sub-schools with different views. So I don't know how long it will take us to get through this, but we'll just take it easy and do the best we can. Nagarjuna is considered the founder of the Madhyamaka school, and he lived in what I came across was the 2nd century Common Era, so a few centuries after the Buddha, and wrote quite a few texts. Probably the most important text is called the Treatise on the Middle Way. Sometimes it's also called the fundamental wisdom of the Middle Way. And so in his text, he talks a lot about emptiness, but it's not something that he invented. He's explaining what the Buddha himself taught in particularly the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, and some other Mahayana Sutras. So Nagarjuna is credited with just drawing out the meaning of emptiness that was explained by the Buddha, but many people had difficulty understanding. And but also many people had difficulty understanding Nagarjuna's text. Also not so easy to understand. And so after Nagarjuna, other Indian masters wrote commentaries to Nagarjuna's text to explain what he was saying. And sometimes they made different interpretations. They would interpret Nagarjuna's texts in different ways. And so that's how there arose different Madhyamaka schools. So first we'll just look at Madhyamaka in general and then go into the divisions. So the term Madhyamaka means middle way, Uma in Tibetan, and it's they use the term middle way because it's the middle way between the two extremes of, on the one hand, permanence. Sometimes it's called permanence or absolutism or reification. There's different terms for that extreme. And according to Madhyamaka, the extreme of permanence would be grasping at things as truly existing, thinking that things exist truly. And so Madhyamaka says, no, things don't exist truly. They're empty of true existence. So in that way, they avoid the extreme of permanence. And the other extreme is nihilism, which is denying the existence of things which do exist. And the Madhyamakas avoid that by saying that things do exist conventionally. So they exist conventionally, but they don't exist truly. And that way they avoid those two extremes. In fact, all the other schools also say that they avoid the two extremes, but they have their own way of explaining how they do that. And then another term for this school, which appears in the definition, is proponent of non-entityness. We'll look at that term in a bit. But anyway, so the definition, this is Madhyamaka in general. A person who's a Madhyamaka in general is a proponent of non-entityness, is a person who propounds Mahayana tenets and does not accept true existence, even nominally. Nominally is similar to saying conventionally. So Mahayana tenets, does anyone remember the significance of that? What does it mean to say Mahayana tenets?
Mahayana tenets included the selflessness of persons, the selflessness of phenomena, not just selflessness of persons.
Right. So that's one of the main differences between Mahayana tenets and Hinayana tenets.
They also talk about the obstructions to knowledge, and they posit the possibility of omniscience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also Buddha nature, all sentient beings having the potential, the ability to become Buddhas, fully enlightened. So that's also a feature of Mahayana. And I guess too, most in the teachings, the texts of Mahayana schools, they would also talk about the path to enlightenment, not only the path to liberation, nirvana, but also the bodhisattva's path. So that would be the subject of the texts in the Mahayana schools. And then, so the really important part is they do not accept true existence, even nominally. All the other schools that are not Madhyamaka do accept true existence. At least some things are truly existing, even if not everything. But they all assert true existence. So Vaibhashika, the first school, they say that all phenomena are truly existent. And Svatantrika say impermanent things are truly existent, but not permanent things. And then Cittamatra, the last school we looked at, say that other powered natures and thoroughly established natures are truly existent, but not imputational natures. Those are just like permanent phenomena other than emptiness. So all the other schools do assert true existence for at least some things. And so this is the distinguishing feature of the Madhyamaka school, compared to the other schools, they don't assert any true existence at all, not even a teeny atom particle. Nothing exists truly. However, the way within Madhyamaka there's divisions, and the way true existence is explained, what is the meaning of true existence, then they would explain that differently. So we have to learn different definitions of true existence. Definition isn't the right word, because true existence doesn't exist. So if something doesn't exist, it can't have a definition, right? That's the rule. The meaning of true existence. What is true existence? If it did exist, what is it all about? And so when we're speaking of Madhyamaka in general and what they believe and what they don't believe, it is important to use the term true existence rather than inherent existence, because inherent existence is refuted only by the Prasangikas, but not by the Svatantrikas. So, that's one of the things we'll learn. Another term for true existence is ultimate existence. So ultimate existence is the same, and both Madhyamaka schools would refute that. Things do not exist ultimately. Huh?
The last one?
Huh?
What did you just say?
I forget.
Some things do not exist ultimately.
Yeah.
Both Svatantrika
Yeah.
refute ultimate existence.
So ultimate existence is like a synonym of true existence, and both of the, or all of the Madhyamakas reject that mode of existence. We'll look at that later, what it actually means. And so then the next point is explaining this term entityness or natureness. That sounds kind of strange, but anyway, that's how some would translate it. And then I found in Geshe Zopa's book, Cutting Through Appearances, a little bit more explanation of that term. He said there's actually three meanings of entityness or natureness. The first meaning is conventional nature. So, yeah, the term nature, let's just stick with nature for now. Nature and entity, I think, are synonymous. That nature. So you do sometimes come across that expression in Buddhist texts. They talk about the nature of something. For example, the nature of fire is to be hot. The nature of ice is to be cold. The nature of the mind is clear and knowing. Okay, so that use of the term nature is talking about the conventional nature. Conventional nature. Yeah. And we use that too also in English. We talk about a person's nature. That person has a very peaceful nature, or that person has a very violent nature. Yeah. So this is, just conventional nature, the sort of characteristics of an object. So that's one use of the term nature. The second use is final nature, which for Madhyamaka would be emptiness of true existence. So this means that the term nature is sometimes used for the final nature, the ultimate nature. Like if you examine something to understand how does it really exist, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, you probe into it, then you come to its final nature. And for Madhyamaka, that's emptiness. So sometimes the term nature refers to emptiness, the ultimate nature of things. It's another use of the term. Then, number three, the term nature is sometimes used for true existence, which is it's kind of weird, but it's almost like 2 and 3 are the opposite. But yeah, it's just how that term is used in texts. So it does sometimes it does sometimes refer to this like a false nature, you know, the thing we're trying to refute, the thing we're trying to recognize isn't there. So it's tricky whenever you come across the term nature, don't think it always has the same meaning. It can have these various meanings. And so, and then Geshe-la said, Madhyamaka, I misspelled that, Madhyamikas, they accept the first and the second. They do accept that things have a conventional nature. You know, fire is hot. Nature, fire is hot, burning. And they accept the second, final nature of things, emptiness of true existence, but they don't accept the third. And so this expression, proponent of non-entityness, which maybe sounds a little bewildering, like what does that mean? Refers to the third meaning of nature, true existence. So a proponent of non-entityness is somebody who propounds that things are empty of true existence. They're rejecting, refuting the true existence of things. And that's exactly what Geshe-ma Kelsang Wangma said in her little booklet. She said the meaning of proponent of non-entityness is a person who propounds the lack of true existence of all phenomena. So that term non-entityness, proponent of non-entityness, doesn't seem to be very common. You don't encounter it very often. So it must be just a nickname, another name for Madhyamaka. But normally we use the term Madhyamaka. Okay, then there are two divisions, Svatantrika, which translates as autonomist, and then Prasangika translates as consequentialist. So how did these two divisions come about? Was it that once upon a time in India, there was this big group of Madhyamakas, and then at a certain point, one group disagreed with another group, and they split off, and they said, we are Svatantrikas. And the other group said, we are Prasangikas. So it doesn't seem that that's what happened. And yeah, I'll just read a little bit from Guy Newland's book, Appearance and Reality. So he says, so in fact, these terms, Svatantrika and Prasangika, do not appear in Indian literature as names for two distinct subsystems. They were probably coined by Tibetan scholars in the 11th century, after the works of Chandrakirti had been translated. So that's what modern contemporary scholars believe, that it's the Tibetans who came up with these names. But that doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean it's wrong, just to understand. and yeah, like there were different Madhyamaka authors in India who wrote texts, commentaries, mainly to Nagarjuna's works, and had somewhat different interpretations of what Nagarjuna was saying. Like this, the story is one of the commentators was Buddha Palita, I don't know exactly. I guess he's in the, there. Anyway, I don't know what century he was, but he was after Nagarjuna. And so he wrote a commentary and, you know, kind of elaborated on what Nagarjuna was saying. Then after him, Baba Viveka, another great master, disagreed with Buddha Palita. He found fault in what Buddha Palita was saying. And so he wrote a text, you know, propounding his own views and, you know, pointing out what he considered were faults in Buddha Palita's views. And the story is, I think they were actually contemporaries, but they belonged to different castes. So Baba Viveka was upper caste, and Buddha Palita was a lower caste. And so then, even though Buddha Palita was still alive, he didn't feel that he could defend himself against Baba Viveka. It wouldn't be appropriate caste-wise. So he didn't he didn't defend himself. But then Chandrakirti came along, and he was also upper caste. And so he wrote his text defending Buddha Palita against Baba Viveka.
Mhm.
And so Chandrakirti's text that we started studying with Geshe Geshe Lundrup, we'll probably continue again later this year, is considered by at least the Gelugpa tradition as a very, very important text because it explains the Prasangika view. And they say Baba Viveka, the way Baba Viveka was explaining things, this is the Svatantrika view. So this is how the Tibetans, or at least the Gelugpa tradition, explains the split. It happened, between these different masters. And so they credit Chandrakirti as being the founder of the Prasangika school, because he's the one that really clarified the Prasangika point of view. And then Baba Viveka is credited with founding the Svatantrika school because his views, his way of explaining things fit into that. So that's a very limited understanding of the story behind the schools that arose, how they arose. So there were different views already in India many centuries ago. And then when they came to Tibet, these texts came to Tibet, the Tibetans were reading all these texts and trying to figure out what's what. They came up with this system, this this way of systemizing the schools, the views. And another thing I saw on Alex's website is that the non-Gelugpa schools also have different ways of dividing Madhyamaka. I didn't look into that yet, but what we learn here, this is the Gelugpa way, but if we go to a Kargyu or a Sakya or a Nyingma teaching, then they may divide Madhyamaka in different ways. So don't hold too tightly to this particular interpretation. So we'll go through each of these schools one at a time, starting with Svatantrika, and in that way it'll become more clear what the differences are. Okay, so Svatantrika-Madhyamaka translates as middle way autonomists. So the definition, this is from Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen's text. It's a Madhyamaka who, by means of accepting autonomous reasons, doesn't assert true existence even nominally. So the last part, saying they don't assert true existence even nominally, that's what makes them Madhyamaka. It's consistent with Madhyamaka. And then the middle part, accepting autonomous reasons, we'll look at that in the next slide. What is the meaning of an autonomous reason? Yeah, it's a little complicated and I don't fully understand it myself, but I'll do my best to explain it. But this is one of the main differences between Svatantrika and Madhyamaka. Svatantrika says there's such a thing as an autonomous. Another way of saying it is inherently existent. Autonomous means inherently existent reasons. And then just quickly looking at the divisions. So the two divisions are long, complicated names. Sotrantika, Svatantrika, Madhyamaka. And so this school or sub-school, they explain nominal existence. Nominal existence means conventional existence, like how things exist on the conventional level. So they explain things mostly in accordance with Sotrantika tenets. So just one example of that is they say that things do exist externally. So like, a table isn't the table that we see isn't just coming from our mind, the ripening of a seed or an imprint in our mind and appearing to exist out there, but not really out there. They don't agree with that. They say there is a table out there, an externally existing table. So similar to Svatantrika, that we studied earlier. So some of their assertions would accord with Svatantrika, but not all. Because, for example, Svatantrika, what did they say? Was it ultimate truth? What were ultimate truths according to Svatantrika? Impermanent phenomena, right? So they would say the table and the chair and our bodies, these are ultimate truths. Well, this school would not agree with that, because according to this school, Svatantrika-Madhyamaka, ultimate truth is emptiness of true existence, not impermanent phenomena. So anyway, some of their views are similar to Svatantrika. In parentheses are some of the main big names of this school. Bhava Viveka, who's said to be the founder, and another one is Jnanagarbha. So these are examples of followers of that school. And then the second one is Yogacara Svatantrika-Madhyamaka. And so they explain things mostly in accordance with Cittamatra tenets or Yogacara tenets. But again, how things exist conventionally on the conventional level. And so just like Cittamatra would say that the table, even though it looks like it's out there, externally existing, but it's not. It's just coming from a seed, an imprint on our mind. That's what Cittamatra says. So this school would agree with that. They refute external existence. They don't agree with everything that Cittamatra says, because Cittamatra would say that the table is truly existing. Well, no Madhyamaka would say that. They refute all phenomena as truly existing. Okay, so just some of their tenets are similar. Okay, so those are the two divisions, and we'll learn more about some of their different views afterwards. But let's look at autonomous reasons. Reasons or signs, another word is sign. Some of you have studied the debate material. And so this comes up, for example, if there's two people who are debating, or it could also happen when we're meditating. We're trying to understand something like subtle impermanence or emptiness, and we're just, analyzing it on our own. Then you can use a syllogism. So a syllogism is a statement that consists of three parts. The first part is the subject, and then the predicate, and then the sign or reason. And I used colors here to point out the different parts of the syllogism. So an example of a syllogism is right up at the top. A person does not truly exist because of being a dependent arising. So what's the subject of that syllogism? Person. It's in red. And what's the predicate? Doesn't truly exist. So that's the thing we're trying to prove. We're trying to understand. And then the sign is...
Because of being a dependent arising.
Yeah. Or you could just say dependent arising. Yeah. So those are the three parts of a syllogism. And so this kind of statement is used either to prove to somebody else that the person doesn't exist truly, or proving it to ourselves in our own mind, in our own meditation, trying to realize true existence. And it's necessary to go through this process. It's not possible to understand a subtle phenomena, hidden phenomena, I should say, hidden phenomena like subtle impermanence or emptiness of true existence without a reason. So we need a reason, a sign to be able to prove that, to be able to gain an inferential realization, inferential valid cognizer of that. A correct syllogism has 3 modes or 3 qualities. Is that what they're called? 3 modes? Yeah. Or 3 aspects. And these are listed below: property of the subject, forward pervasion, and counter pervasion. Okay, so these all have to work in order for the syllogism to be correct. So before we go into that, so Svatantrikas, what they say is that a correct reason or a correct sign inherently possesses the 3 modes. So it has the 3 modes inherently. So let's go through the 3 modes. The first is property of the subject. What that means is that the reason, dependent arising, is a property of the subject. That means the subject person has that property, has that quality of being dependent arising, a dependent phenomena. So that has to work. That has to be correct for the reason to be correct. And then the forward pervasion is that the predicate, in this case, doesn't truly exist, pervades the reason, dependent arising. So what that means is whatever is a dependent arising is pervaded by being not truly existing. Whatever is a dependent arising doesn't truly exist. So that pervasion has to work, has to be true, has to be valid. And then the counter pervasion is the opposite of the predicate, does truly exist, is pervaded by the opposite of the reason, not a dependent arising. So that means that if something doesn't truly exist, then necessarily it isn't a dependent arising. So they say that you don't really have to check the 3rd mode, because if the 2nd mode is true, the forward pervasion is true, then automatically the counter pervasion is true as well. But it's just a double check, making doubly sure that what you're saying is true. So that's just in general, the 3 modes of a syllogism. So what the Svatantrikas say is that all these 3 modes have to exist inherently, autonomously from their own side. So for example, the first mode, the reason is inherently a property of the subject. And for the 2nd mode, the predicate inherently pervades the reason, and so on. Because for them, for this school, as Svatantrikas, they believe that in order for something to exist, it has to exist inherently. If it didn't exist inherently, having its own mode of existence from its own side, its own characteristics, if it didn't exist in that way, then it couldn't exist at all. So they say that when you're searching for an object, like a table, you have to find something there from the object side, from the side of the table, in order for it to validly exist. So this is their view, or this is what Bhavaviveka, I'm not sure if in Bhavaviveka's writings, he did actually say, I believe in inherent existence. I believe things inherently exist. I'm not sure if he said that, but I think what happened was Lama Tsongkhapa, reading Bhavaviveka's works, pulled that out. he deduced that from the things that Baba Viveka was saying. He realized, oh, Baba Viveka believes in inherent existence. I think it works like that. But another difference between so that's the Svatantrikas. They say that for things to exist, they have to exist inherently, whereas Prasangikas, as we've heard again and again and again, disagree. For them, inherent existence is just the same as true existence. Those two terms have the same meaning, and so they refute inherent existence. Nothing exists inherently. So that's the main difference between these two schools, whether they assert or they refute inherent existence. But another difference too is that the Svatantrikas, and I think Baba Viveka did actually say that in his text, that when you're debating with somebody, you have to use a syllogism. You have to use one of these autonomous, independently, inherently existing syllogisms, because apparently Buddha Palita, who he was disagreeing with, Buddha Palita mainly used consequences. And Baba Viveka says, no, it's not enough just to use consequences. You have to use syllogism. So a consequence is stated, and I don't fully understand it, but it's stated in a different way. So we could make a consequence out of this syllogism. So if you're dealing with an opponent, and the opponent says, I think persons are truly existent. Person is truly existent. Then you could throw them a consequence saying, it follows that a person is not a dependent arising because of being truly existent. So you're using the same parts, the same components of the syllogism, but using them in a different way. So consequences usually start out with, it follows that, meaning according to you, according to what you're saying, according to your assertion, then this. So you're throwing at them a kind of absurd consequence of their position. So according to you, if a person truly exists, then that means a person isn't dependent arising. And that should make the person go, huh? Oh. And hopefully, if their mind is ready, they'll realize, oh, yeah, it must be true that persons do not truly exist. So that's the way that consequences are used. And so that's the meaning of prasangika. The word prasangika means consequence, because this is the main way that they are dealing with their opponents or people who have opposite views, throwing consequences at them. And it's not that they never use syllogisms, but they think it's not always necessary. Sometimes a consequence is enough. That will be enough to get the person to see the mistake that they're making and straighten out. And so I think this is what Buddha Palita was proposing. And then Baba Viveka disagreed. He said, no, it's not enough just to use consequences. You need to use syllogisms. And even if you do use a consequence, you have to follow it up with a syllogism. So that's one of the differences between these schools. It's like the procedure in debate. How do you debate with someone in order to get that person to realize something like emptiness or subtle impermanence? Baba Viveka and Jnanagarbha are examples of Svatantrikas. And Jnanagarbha isn't so famous as Baba Viveka, but he did write a text. I don't know if it's been translated, but it's called Discrimination of the Two Truths. And I also found out he was the teacher of Shantarakshita, who comes in the next group. So among the Yogacharas, Svatantrika-Madhyamakas are Shantarakshita, and he was a really important person in the history of Buddhism in Tibet. He was one of the earliest Indian masters who came, and he also brought the lineage of ordination. At least the bhikshu He brought the Bhikshu ordination lineage into Tibet, not the Bhikshuni, but at least, Tibetans were able to take the Bhikshu ordination. And he's also said to be the founder of Yogacara Svatantrika. He's the one who created that particular school. And he wrote a number of texts. One is called The Ornament of the Middle Way, which is there's, I think, a few translations of that. One translation is by James Blumenthal, who was a teacher at Maitripa College. He passed away. But yeah, so there's a translation of that text. So I think that's the one that explains the Yogacara Svatantrika views. And then Haribhadra is one of the disciples of Shantarakshita. I don't think he ever came to Tibet, but he's important in that he wrote a number of commentaries to the Ornament for Clear Realizations, Abbey Samalankar, that Tibetans consider, important commentaries, and they study those commentaries. And then Kamalashila. We've heard of Kamalashila. We just finished studying his text on stages of meditation. He was also a disciple of Shantarakshita and a proponent of Yogacara Svatantrika-Madhyamaka. And he wrote a text on Middle Way as well, Illumination of the Middle Way. I don't know, has that been translated? Anyone seen Illumination of the Middle Way? So those are some of the important people in those two schools. And then there's the etymology explaining this term, Svatantrika. So Bhava Viveka is called a Svatantrika-Madhyamaka because he's a Madhyamika who asserts autonomous signs. So Svatantra is the Sanskrit term that means autonomous signs or autonomous reasons. Rangyu in Tibetan. That's the meaning of the name of this particular school. Reasons existing from their own side. Okay, so let's go a little further into their assertions. Next slide. What they say about objects. So again, this is Svatantrika-Madhyamaka. All phenomena exist by way of their own characteristics, exist from their own side, and exist inherently. Now, this is on the conventional level. It's not always stated so clearly, but this school says that things exist inherently on the conventional level, but not ultimately. So they do make a distinction there. We'll get into that more later. But anyway, these are three terms that they that are synonymous and that apply to all phenomena. All phenomena exist from their own side, inherently, and by their own characteristics. So I'll read something from Geshe Jamba Tekshok's commentary to explain these terms. So existing from its own side, that's the middle one, this means that a phenomenon can be found when it's looked for. When you look for something, you can find something there. It has its own quality. And then he goes on to say, the Svatantrikas say that it's not enough to say that everything is merely imputed. That's what Prasangika says. Merely imputed. Things are merely imputed. So the Svatantrikas don't agree with that. They say for something to exist, there has to be something existing from the side of the object plus the imputation. I mean, they do agree that things are imputed, but they still have to say, things do have to have something from their own side. So, for example, to say that a person is attractive, there needs to be some qualities in that person to be able to say they're attractive. It's not sufficient for attractiveness to be merely imputed. So this is their view. I'm just saying this is how they think. It's not enough just to impute things. Things are merely imputed. So they even say that if it was enough just to impute things, then you could call a dog a lion, and the dog would be a lion. We could call Upeka an elephant, and Upeka would be an elephant. This is their consequence, the consequence they throw to the prasangikas. If things are merely imputed, then you could call anything anything, and just by imputing it, it would be that. Kind of makes sense. Well, the prasangikas have an answer to that. They have a way of responding to that. We'll get to that later. So they say that in order to label an object, to impute an object, the object must possess certain characteristics that correspond to that label. So there has to be characteristics in the object to be able to call it that name, that term. So that's their reason for saying that things exist by way of their own characteristics, they exist from their own side, and they exist inherently. But according to Prasangika, those terms are synonymous with true existence, and that none of them are true. They're all false. They're all objects to be negated. So Prasangika would say, no, nothing exists by way of its own characteristics. Nothing exists from its own side. Nothing exists inherently. Saying those things is the same as saying truly existent. So they disagree. They refute all of those. Okay, so we'll stop there. Next time we'll go into ultimate truths. The text by Jetsun Chokyi Gyaltsen doesn't give definitions of ultimate truths and conventional truths. So I took them from Cutting Through Appearances. So we'll look at those next time. Any questions?
Going back to what you learned about the other Tibetan schools that have the 8 consciousnesses, did you see if having the 8 consciousnesses, does that mean they necessarily assert no external objects too?
So what you're asking is, you know, if the non-Gelug schools say that Madhyamaka accepts the 8 consciousnesses, then does that also affect their views about external objects?
Mm-hmm.
Well, among Madhyamaka, there's Svatantrika and Prasangika, and then within Svatantrika, there's Svatantrika, Svatantrika, and Yogacara Svatantrika. So Yogacara Svatantrika refutes external objects, like Cittamatra. So Svatantrika and Prasangika accept external objects. So I don't think.
So Kagyu Prasangika, who has 8 consciousnesses, would still not accept, or would still assert external objects.
I don't know. I didn't look into that.
Yeah, I just wondered if it came up in what you were saying.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think you could. Well, I think my understanding is that they use these terms. Yeah, the term alaya vijnana is used, but they explain them in a different way, and they're more related with clear light mind and with emptiness. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you would have to look into those schools. But like I said, when I tried to read their views, I found it difficult. Yeah. Yeah, that's something you could explore, or I could explore. We'll see.
Svatantrika related to Sautrantika? Did it come from that term?
No, Sautrantika, Sautra. I don't even know how to say it properly. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but Sautrantika, that's based on the term sutra. So the meaning of Sautrantika is followers of sutra. They put a lot of importance on, reading the sutras rather than the Abhidharma texts. So they're kind of going back to the Buddhist sutras. So that's the meaning of Svatantrika. But then Svatantrika is a different word which means autonomous reasons, autonomous signs. So they sound a little bit similar, but they are, different words. I wish I knew Sanskrit, but quite difficult to study. And some people just use they skip over the Sanskrit terms, and I don't know what they would call. They'd probably say autonomous sutra followers or something like that for that school. And autonomous mind-only followers. So they translate everything in English. So feel free to do that if you want, if you prefer to use the English terms, because I studied tenets learning the Sanskrit terms. I just got used to thinking of them in that way, and so I use those terms. Okay, so let's stop there and dedicate the merit, the positive energy.